Right, the parable of the sower. So when he sowed, some seeds fell by the wayside. The fowls came to devour them. Now this we were tying into the curse of Cain at the very beginning. And I'm going to go into a little more on the curse of Cain today. Talked about the voice of his brother's blood cries to me from the ground. Now if you remember, we went through the word voice. It has a multitude of meanings in the Old Testament. And blood does not speak. Yet the act of what took place was crying aloud. Crying aloud. And so it was speaking. His brother's blood crying aloud. The till fell to the ground and shall not henceforth yield her strength. To the fugitive and the vagabond you shall be on the earth. For so those that picked up the seed of Cain, in the term the Bible uses the way of Cain, you will find them in that seed in an unfertile ground. We went through the very roots of these descendants where they would basically live at the beginning. They would be in a desert land. They would be like nomads. They would be like vagabonds around the face of the earth. And we look at the peoples today, the Arab nations, and you'll see that it's the basic core of the way they are. The wayside, we showed as we went through and explained the wayside, the fugitive and the vagabond, those on the outside, on the wayside. Stony places, we talked about the stony places the Bible explained to us, which hence no more yield her strength. In other words, when you go into the ground, you ground up rock, it's more like sand, it just doesn't produce like it's supposed to. You've got to build fertile soil if you're going to try to grow in something like that. The voice of your brother's blood, we talked about that in depth last time, so I won't go through that. Now, the warning of the thorns this was very important for our day. Joshua 23 says, else in any way if you go back and cleave to the remnant of these nations. Now we can apply that today in our lives. God called you out of the world. If you decide you're going to go back and cleave unto what you just left, you have got a problem. You know, you think then and there when you read this, but you have to apply this is left for us today. So there's a multitude of meanings here. So it's also telling us about in your life, if there was something that was out there, your way of Cain, your way of Ishmael or Esau, then if you're going out in that direction, it says you go back, you cleave unto that caste, even the remain among you, and make marriages with them and go in unto them, and they to you know for a certainty that the Lord your God will no more drive out any of these nations before you. The warning here that you can apply in the duality of meanings is this. If you've been called out of the world and you decide to go back to your old ways, God says He's going to turn you over to yourself. Now, that's scary. Because there's coming a time you're going to need God to intervene on your behalf, and He won't be there. And He's telling us, know for a certainty that if you do that, you're going to get problems. Without any doubt. I mean, that ought to chill your bones when you think about when you step out of God's protection and say, oh, God understands I'm weak. I'll just do this. Yeah, He certainly understands that He's going to turn you over to yourself and you're out there on your own. When you need Him, He won't be there. In fact, there's many scriptures say, you're going to call to me and I will not answer. And that's a warning we need to think about, especially God's people. If you think that you can every now and then just go back and sneak a peek at sin, let's put it that way, sneak a peek at sin. Hey, that wouldn't be a bad title for a sermon, huh? Sneaking a peek at sin. All right, it goes on, it says that they will become snares and traps unto you, and scourges in your sides, and thorns in your eyes, until you perish from off the good land that God has given you. David's warning, King David, who was a man after God's own heart, said, but the sons of Belial shall be all of them as thorns thrust away, because they cannot be taken with hands. Try to remove today the Islam people from America. Now, I'm going to show you how the rest of the world's dealing with it, and they're having a hard time too. But you can't do it. You just can't do it. It says, but the man that shall touch them must be fenced with iron. In other words, you can't do it on your own. You've got to have God's protection if you're going to deal with this area. And the staff of a spear. All right. Now, when he sowed, some seeds fell by the wayside, and the fowls came and they devoured them up. All right, let's talk about the fowls now. Now, we talked about the thorns, the wayside. We talked about the tares, and we all tied that in to the families and how they all intermingled. I want to talk about the fowls today. and tie it all in together for this conclusion. So that when anyone hears the word of the kingdom and understands it not, then comes the wicked one and catches away that which was sown in his heart. This is he which received seed by the wayside. Now the question we want to deal with today is, who are the fowls? Now there's a big difference in the parable of the application of tares, thorns, wayside. Those all come up from within. A fowl comes from without. The fowl is, you get this appearance of. What's the two words? Now, fowl, if I was giving you Western thinking, what are you looking at? You got a picture of a bird in your head. Right? Now, we're not thinking that way. We're thinking Hebrew thinking. What does a fowl do? So this is what we have to understand here. All right, so we're looking at the fowl. We're not looking at the bird. You know, the first thing in your mind, you might think of a vulture. You know, you might think of an old blackbird or black-old crow. You might think of a hawk or an eagle, and they're out there, and they're out there circling. They're coming in, and they're pouncing. But the fowl is what it does. Therefore, it does not eliminate it to just a bird. It talks about what's happening. It's talking about something coming from without, coming in and taking what God has planted. Now that opens up a whole new realm for you than just a bird. So as I'm going through in this thinking, I said, well, I remember when I was out on a fishing trip and we went catching tuna. You might remember a few years back, I might have told you the story of these tuna. Well, we were out on this tuna trip fishing. And it was very interesting. I've never done it before. In fact, it's the only time I had the chance to do this. Is that the captain would get up in his tower and he would look out and he would see this things jumping all around, these little babies like bait fish. I say bait, they're about probably that big. And they're jumping and he was flying over to where they were at. Is what was happening is that the tuna were circling, catching the wayside of the small bait fish that were out there. And as they would circle this fish, they make what's called the ball of the bait fish. And the bait fish get tighter and tighter and tighter. In fact, they push so much, they push themselves out of the water. And you see them flipping around as if they're on dry land because they've been pushed in so tight because the tuna, who are circling like a fowl to grab after the fish that are around the edges. And then when they get them all nice and tight, then they go into and they would dive through or dive up through, and then they would have their mouths open, and the mouths would be filled with all these bait fish, and they would continue to do this until something else happened. The sharks would hear all this, smell the blood, then the sharks begin circling the tuna. Really? And then the sharks would come around and start scooping in and eating the tuna. And then when that would happen, it would all break loose, the tuna would all break up, the fish would go off, and then all of a sudden, 15, 20 minutes later, he'd be back in his tower, the captain, and it would take place again down further. And the whole cycle would happen over and over and over again. So when I saw this, I said, well, that reminds me about the tuna. Now, when you think about it in that fashion, you have that cycle happening in your life over and over and over again. As if Satan is out there like this fowl, God has placed the seed in your heart, and He's waiting for the opportunity for you to step outside that protective ball so that He can snatch you away. Now, that's pretty understandable. But let's talk about the specifics of this fowl. Remember the Hebrew word focus on what it does. So when he sowed the seed, some seeds fell by the wayside, the fowls came up, and what did they do? They devoured them. So the focus here is to be able to go after and to destroy. To bring to what? To waste it, to bring it to naught. That's what's going on here. The difference in the tares and the thorns is that they came up from within. The fowls come from without. That's the big difference that you're seeing here. Now, the Apostle Paul knew this when he told it to the elders, when he left them at Ephesus. You remember he was leaving Ephesus. He had spent a couple years with them. He was getting ready to leave, so he had to give a very serious and a very painful warning. Paul's warning. In the book of Acts 20, verse 28 says, "Take heed, therefore, unto yourselves and to the flock over which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers, to feed the church of God, which He has purchased with His own blood. For this I know, that after my departing shall grievous wolves come in." Now you can interject here Okay, you can interject fowls if you'd like. Because what's happening is, what does a wolf do? They travel in packs, right? They sit around and they watch and look for the weak. And then they will begin to circle the weak until they can isolate them and to go in and devour their prey. All right, so if you're thinking the Hebrew word, the fowl, it does mean what it says. It's telling you what it does. And a wolf will be like that. All right, so a wolf is working as a fowl to go and circle and to destroy the flock. Also of your own selves shall men arise, speaking perverse things, and draw away disciples after them. Therefore watch. So Paul was talking about the tares and the thorns. So Paul understood the principle clearly what Jesus Christ was talking about in the parables. He says that in your own midst, he says right in the middle of the house of God, people are going to come up and try to destroy everything that God has built. Now, you wouldn't think that that could possibly happen, huh? That a church could be running along very happy, and then all of a sudden something happened. People aren't talking to one another. There's anger going on. Splits begin to take place. How does it happen? Two ways. Either coming in from without or coming up from within. Paul knew this, and he warned them. Look what he says. Therefore, watch and remember that for the space of 3 years, I cease not to warn you, everyone, night and day, with tears. They probably got so tired of Paul talking about that. Now, they tell me sometimes, well, why do you keep telling us this about prophecy? I mean, we all know this stuff. It's because there are people who are going to hear it who don't know it. And God says, remind them. You meet in due season and you warn the world what's coming. Because even in these warnings, quite often we hear them, they just go right by us. They just don't sink in. And I guarantee you, people will hear this message and it's not sinking in the depth of the danger that we are in today in America. Now, I'm telling you from this pulpit that the United States is in bad shape. And it's not going to get better. I don't care who tells you it is. I don't care if it's a Republican. I don't care if it's a Democrat. I don't care who it is. It isn't going to get any better. We need to understand that. As God's people, we cannot buy ourselves out of the problems we're in today. There's just no way to do it. Anyone who's got any sense in Washington knows that. Now, anybody who's running this nation thinks of what first? Think of myself first, how do I get reelected? And they will not make decisions that's going to get them put out. The party second. The party second is we need to protect the party because that's what keeps us in power. And when the party is going to be in power, they look at who can they sacrifice within the party to get rid of one. All right, he's up for re-election, he isn't going to make it. Make him the scapegoat to do the dirty work because he's not up for re-election anyway. So then, who's last? The nation is last. What does God fit into the picture? God is not in the picture. And when God's not in the picture, it cannot survive. We are God's people. I'm going to close this today with a series with some scriptures from Jeremiah and the warnings that God tells us. Now, we need to understand that. Now, I've been saying that, and it's not getting better. You need to understand that. When your children ask, and mine asked me just the other day, well, what's the answer to this? I said, there is no answer other than God and Jesus Christ returning. And my daughter put her head down. She said, but I want my life. You know, I know where she's coming from, because when God called me, I was 19 years old. And you know what? I was angry. Because I wanted my life. You know, I said, well, Jesus Christ will come back in a few years. I'm not married yet. I don't have kids. I don't have any future. What hope is there for me? Because we can't see past the return of Jesus Christ. I'm telling you, we're closer than we think. Yes, I'm sure we can go another 5, 10, 15 years, maybe. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's here tomorrow. But what has been set up in just 1 year ought to frighten everybody to their bones. Things are moving awfully quickly. That quicker than I thought. The fowls. The fowls come in and take away something that does not belong to them. Always on the prowl, seeking whom they may catch away, is likened unto Satan.